It's a possibility, the one that I'm actually afraid to speak about. Because speaking about a world war is speaking about my dreams, is speaking about a future. And if you can be keen and go to your history and just look at the way the world war was, you can understand that it is not an easy thing. And therefore, there's always a smoke, and where there is smoke, there will definitely be fire. People in different contexts experience life differently, and especially in Africa, where the gap between, say, the poor and the rich is actually vast. Same continent, but countries that are almost far apart.
It's another day, it's another time. Welcome to yet another amazing episode of Becoming Better Together. And today I want to talk about something that is very controversial, very political, geopolitics is involved, but ladies and gentlemen, we gotta have this conversation right here in Kenya. And my guest for today is I've known him for a while. I studied with the brother. Our classmates with his brother. I've seen his post around these things, and I said, why not let's get a youth voice on what is happening in Iraq. Is it Iraq or Iran? Iran and the US. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the war in Iran and its impact in Kenya. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Maybe before we begin, introduce yourself.
Asante sana, thank you for inviting me here. I'm Duncan Mudali, as you know. I'm a scholar, a medic, a brother, and an African who is enthusiastic about what is going on in Africa. And when you asked me out about this discussion, I was actually very impressed. And now we are here. Let us see what is happening in Iran, the US, the war, and our position in it actually.
You know, the moment you open your phone every day in the morning, and then you see that missile strike, be it in the Middle East, what is your first instinct? Is it empathy, or have people become scroll numb to even feel whatever is happening globally?
That's quite interesting because I'm looking at it from a perspective where usual things, when you see things for a long time, you become numb, or rather, things become normal when they should not. A case in point is there is actually a war in Iran, but when you see it in the terms of a meme. Or rather, after you just see a video of a war or a missile, the next video you are scrolling is actually a meme or a comedy. And so it's sort of, yes, we have the war in our phones, but the war is not in our hearts yet. We do not feel the way those people feel. I mean, social media in terms of TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, or whatever anybody is using, has become in such a way that there's the aspect of reels, there's the aspect of information being brought closer. So actually, Mudali, we have information close to us, but the comprehension of the depth of the information is what I feel that is lacking. And therefore, people see war as jokes, as videos, as just any other type of content. And therefore, we do not really understand about a war that has gone on for a while. And Mudali, just to put this into context, probably one would ask, why is Iran fighting today? And this war actually started a while back in the 1980s. It is a war that was actually initially between Iraq and Iran. And it was actually as a result of the revolution that was actually in Iran. So Iraq took the advantage with Saddam Hussein being the leader of Iraq at the time. He saw that as a perfect opportunity to exploit the opportunities, which I mean oil and other resources that were in Iran as a result of the war, the instability that was inside Iran. So this went on for like 8 years, and you can understand within these 8 years, Iran was building a military and building resilience. And it is this resilience that has brought now the war we are seeing today. Now we have Iran, we have the US, we have their allies, and now the war is bigger. It is no longer between Iran and Iraq, you understand? So as much as we become scroll numb to this war, and mind you, during that war, the initial war between Iraq and Iran, I told you it went on between 1980 and 1988. For 8 years, there were more than 500 million deaths, and actually in excess of 1 million casualties. this should tell you of the impact of the war, so that when you see that missile in the air, you should know that millions of people have gone to the grave, and therefore it is just not any other content, and therefore our lack of empathy or feeling the way those people feel is just exacerbated by this what I would say is content becoming normal, things becoming normal. You scroll a reel that has missiles in it, then you go to comedy, and the next thing your heart feels like this is a normal thing. So we've definitely become scroll now.
If you can construct it from the 1980s, that takes us back even to the World War I and World War II, where it just began as something small, then countries began having allies and all that, and this escalates to a third world war.
Yes, it's a possibility, the one that I'm actually afraid to speak about, because speaking about a world war is speaking about my dreams, is speaking about a future. And if you can be keen and go to your history and just look at the way the world war was, you can understand that it is not an easy thing, and therefore there's always a smoke, and where there is smoke there will definitely be fire. And as you can see, countries are aligning. We can see Russia, we can see the Ukraine, people are aligning towards different directions. And even in Africa, we might see a period where some countries might take positions, and this could escalate to a bigger thing and probably to a war, and we wouldn't want to get there.
Speaking of Africa, do you feel we are fed the full story, or is just snippets of whatever is happening?
That's an interesting question. I mean, our media, or the media, is actually shaped by various things. Actually, it is shaped by who owns the media, the ownership of the media. It is shaped by the audience that is targeted by that media, right? And it is shaped by geopolitics. What is in it for us as the media when portraying certain information? And therefore, even looking at from the context of our country, Kenya, our information, or rather we get information from our Western media, that's maybe CNN and BBC, and you can see this is information that is portrayed to us from them, and to some extent maybe it could be one-sided, or it could be portrayed in a way that it fits a certain narrative. You understand me? And therefore, as a consequence, in Africa or in any other setting, the media, much as we will say it is independent based on where you are, it is also controlled by some powers, including political powers. And in some instances, for example in Africa, by the virtue that we are fed by Western or even Eastern media, we could not be getting the full information, or rather we could be getting partial information and not actually the information regarding the war, or information that could help us even make better decisions.
As a continent, are we in a position to take part in the war? Like, I saw a president tweet that, you know, whatever is happening here, actually even before we go to Iraq and Iran, we got involved in Haiti. And I usually ask myself, as a continent, as a country, are we in a position to engage in wars globally?
Mudali, that's a big ask. It's a big ask. I'm looking at the type of war that is going on in the Middle East and in the global North, and I'm looking a high-intensive war. That is that war with that is at with high stakes and missiles and drones and nuclear power. And we are looking at countries like Iran, a country whose nuclear power is massive, that the US has a problem with it. And I'm looking at Africa, which is full of third world countries, and I'm looking at us as a continent, and I'm looking at our nuclear power even. And no offense, Mudali, but I don't think Africa has positioned itself to a position where if a war came out, we would be in a position, even if we took sides, to really get into the war and maybe get something outside the war.
Would you have advocated for a more united Africa, whereby we are just one country with the states, maybe to boost stability, to build cohesiveness as a continent? Well,
interesting. As a Pan-African, and having listened to Pan-Africans, like the likes of Magufuli, maybe people will say he's a Pan-African or not, the likes of PLO, And their belief has always been that. But Mwavali, we live in a continent, or rather in a setting where personal interests are interesting, and that countries, the independence that we got has actually divided us in a way. Allow me to say that. Why do I say that? Even in the East African community, the relationship between the three countries, much as it has been, well, it has not been to the extent that we would say such cohesion. As you can remember, for example, when we've had the problems in Tanzania, for example, you could see the push and pull between Kenyans and Tanzanians, and you could see, well, Africa should have one voice, but to achieve that, it would take the goodwill of the leaders, and I'm not so sure African leaders are in a position to make Africa one, maybe due to personal interests.
Between Kenya having its own perspectives of a war, condemning the war in Iran, taking part in Haiti and all that, and having the African Union speak on behalf of African countries, that we as Africans, we don't, because I tend to see we have a very weak African Union, if I'm to say. I don't know if its mandate is being fully implemented, or it's just a body that exists where leaders meet to converse. Do you think they are the ones to speak on behalf of us, so that if something happens, Kenya can merge resources with Tanzania, with South Africa, with Ghana, so that as a continent we are able to protect ourselves?
Africa, actually, you put it very well. African Union. Initially, it was called Organization of African Unity. You understand? The word speaks volumes. I mean, it should be, look, an ideal situation, perfect, which does not exist in the normal world, will be an Africa where we pull resources together, Mwavali, so that, as you rightly put it, when there is a conflict, a problem, or an eventuality, even a disaster, I would say, that we pull our resources together. But that is not the case, Mwavali, and as I've rightly put it, it would be ideal if it would be together, but due to personal interest and geopolitics and the way people are aligned and the greed within African leaders, sorry to say, it becomes so hard to actualize this. Yeah.
We saw a war in Congo, very M23 rebels and Rwanda and all that, but the world never took very keen interest. Why would the world take a lot of interest in whatever is happening in the Middle East, but whatever is happening within Africa sound like it's just a normal thing?
Thank you for that question, and it's actually an interesting one, because actually the DRC is close to us here in Kenya than Iran is. But I will dare say, Mwavali, there are people that if you told them about the conflict in Iraq here in Kenya, well, they wouldn't have an idea, or they would maybe think it's just another war. But if you told them about Iraq, probably they have passed by TikTok, they have seen a missile, a drone, or they have seen a joke around it. And so, what does this point to? The media, the way war or even information is portrayed. It has been portrayed in such a way that who is involved, number one, and where do you stay strategically. For example, the war in Iran. Iran is a strategic power, politically, number one, and economically. As you know, most of the oil, it's with the biggest oil reserves, and also waterways that pass around it. And
you say of oil in Iran, I think Congo is the largest supplier of raw minerals globally.
One would argue that, and we will come to that actually, one would argue that why we are saying that why a country full of resources, or Africa as a country full of resources, or as a continent full of resources, is again reliant on people we should be on people we should not be relying on.
Because we are told oil comes from Iran, right?
Yes.
So if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, there are rumors that there is little oil. We discovered oil in Turkana. Libya is one of the largest producers of oil in Africa.
Nigeria as well. So why? It boils down to where we have positioned ourselves as Africa. And Africa we have positioned as consumers and actually not producers. And therefore, we have the guts of getting our own oil, exporting it for it to be processed, and then getting it back in a way that makes imports expensive. And even when we have it, it has been exploited in a way that those that extract the oil benefit more than those that are the owners of the oil. For example, our deal in Turkana, actually there were rumors of in calculation of over 70% going to those extracting the oil, and less than 15% getting back to in Kenya, and even to the locals. It begs the question, to what extent do investors come in to help us, and then when they use our primary materials, then to what extent do we factor in us as the original producers of the primary materials? Because in most instances, Mwavali, we have the primary materials, but we end up getting the finished products at an expensive price, which is ridiculous to say. And that in the war is very, very there, because imports have been affected, that is fuel, and even we go to the extent that we import some products, including rice. We export them from we import them from the Middle East. You can imagine if this war continued, the position it will put some countries, especially those that are dependent on imports from the Middle East.
You know, I try to figure out where Africa draws the line on all of these things, because what do we lack? You know, I once had a conversation on the boy was sharing with us on the African Voices and the Youth, and he told us the colonialists implanted a consumer mindset in our brains that until we fear standing out when we have ideas to share whatever we can do. And it begs me to ask that if we are to go back to colonialism, are we still under colonialism? Or whatever we say we got independence was just a fallacy that we tend to enjoy to govern ourselves, but still there is someone at the back there pulling the ropes and telling you, hey, don't do this, do this.
I'm actually putting a word to it, Mwavali. It is neocolonialism. I mean, it is neocolonialism. It is just, as you rightly put it, you're very okay. I mean, it is colonialism from a different perspective. I mean, because there's somebody definitely controlling, one, the narrative, what we hear, two, what we take, and even three, the information even around us. And as a consequence, we are still under the leadership, much as we might accept this or not, because look, policies even, and even policies on the international level, say even treaties in the UN and even some conventions. The way these treaties have been applied, Mwavali, you will see that there are countries, especially Western countries, whose the inclination towards the treaties, conventions, and agreements that are global, these countries, the treatment is different compared to those in Africa. And therefore, as a consequence, we are controlled. The control is elsewhere. We might not just accept it. And it goes further into our economy. The World Bank, Mwavali, it is our biggest funder. We are not in a position to even fund ourselves from local. And therefore, if we collapse and we cannot borrow, you definitely know what will happen. If we cannot borrow, then our economy sort of becomes in a slum. And who do we borrow from? We don't even borrow from Africa. Either we are borrowing from the East in China or from the West in the US and the likes. And therefore, we are still controlled. Somebody is definitely pressing the button or the remote. From some remote place, we might not accept it. That is the truth.
You speak of us borrowing, but Africa has a bank. I think it's called African Development Bank. A Bank of Africa. Why can't Africa just borrow from its own bank? Or I'd say, is it the fact that we have different currencies with different values?
You know, this discussion, Mwavali, and it is interesting that you bring it up. This discussion about currency, you see, saying Africa to be one, and using the same currency, is almost one and the same thing. And therefore, we have been limited by various things, including the people will say the use of a common language, the use of a common currency, something like that. But now when it comes to the global logistics, in terms of funding countries, for example, we have always thought of borrowing from the East or the West because it is the people we have known from the beginning. It's the people we have been borrowing from. Number two, our leaders have created relationships in the East and in the West in such a way that this borrowing from the East and the West has, in a way, benefited them in some way or the other. And therefore, even the control of who we borrow from, for example, in Kenya, speaking for our country, for example, in Kenya, the control of who we borrow from is external, and even the leaders have influence over who we borrow from. And actually, looking at this Mudali, it just further influences that our economics is influenced from elsewhere. And therefore, even if we had our own bank, the financial muscle in Africa has not yet been to the level which we will say it will serve us as a continent, individually and self-independent.
Does the word international law mean something to you?
Definitely does. And international law has been classified in different. International law could be in the terms of the United Nations. It's a script of the international law. We have treaties, international treaties, and we also have conventions. Now, the issue, Mudali, is not even around the existence of the international law. The issue is around the application of the international law. And that's why I told you geopolitics is playing a very critical factor in this. Because the way this even international law has been applied, it has been applied based on who are you and where do you stand politically. And even the UN, in terms of looking for peace globally, you will see its reaction towards our wars we have discussed in the DR Congo and even in Iran. As a matter of fact, this war in Congo has gone on for a long time, but the concentration or even the discussion around it has been very minimal. You understand? So, but since the war is in Iran now and the US and other allies, you see the discussion. So the law is there, it defines what has to happen, but the way the law has been applied, it has been applied selectively. And now this is the issue, not about the existence of the law, rather the application of it. Is it selective? Does it discriminate? And I would say that the law has been applied in ways that have not favored some countries or instances, especially in Africa.
Our neutrality seems like a weakness. Would you say so? The fact that we as Africans, we don't want to involve ourselves with whatever is happening in Iran, even though it's affecting us in one or the other. Because if the war continues, we are in April, if the war goes till June, July, it means the Strait of Hormuz will be closed. There will be no supply of oil. And we know oil is a crucial product in making other products. So it means there's going to be a hike of prices. And importation will also be a challenge. Is our neutrality a weakness?
Well, neutrality, Mudali, interesting you bring that point up. Neutrality is from, I would say, in my opinion, from two perspectives. One, you are neutral because the issue at hand is high stakes, and therefore you taking a side, affects directly. You taking a side directly affects how you relate with your allies, for example. For example, in Kenya, the war in Iran and the US, for example, by taking a side, you see, Kenya, in some instances, maybe we will depend on Iran or the US. So being neutral to some extent, one, is an issue of caution. You don't want to take a side, yet you know you depend on those people, for example, taking an opposite side. And so this one is an issue of reservedness. Then there is neutrality around our lack of say in the global arena. I don't know if you get that point. What I mean is this, Africa, we haven't positioned ourselves in a way that we are in the discussion in global politics. And even when the discussions are made, for example, in this war, Africa has not positioned itself, and even the view of the AU, African Union, has not been put in. So I would say it is maybe our lack of the muscle on the global arena, one, but also as a conservative measure, Mudali, so that you don't want to take a side, while you know in one way or the other you depend on both of the sides. So you are neutral because you are protecting your interests, and therefore governments are trying to put that delicate balance between also being outspoken and number two, so also protecting interests of the country.
President Ruto once was pushing that as a continent, we need a permanent seat in the United Nations. We should not be invited as guests. Now the question comes here: Africa has over 50 countries. Okay, if they are to say, fine, you wanna sit at the table, there's the seat. Now who is going to sit at the table?
It's interesting that your question even portrays how Africa views itself. And you see, your question even deviates from the issue of Africa being in the UN to the issue of who
Will be in the UN.
in the UN. And actually, us being in the UN is an issue of bringing our issue or our voice in the global stage. And actually, so as Africans, it will be more of, is it Kenya? Is it Uganda? Or is it in the West? Is it Nigeria? Or in the South, in South Africa? Or
because obviously if you are the one pushing for it, he'll say, okay, I push for this, I'm the first to go.
But then we would have to look that from a broader perspective. Then what is in it for us? And probably the same way we look for the chairman will be, I would suggest, maybe as we look getting a permanent seat on the global arena, Mudali, maybe at the same time we could also do the same thing, the way we look for the chairman, and decide maybe who advocates for our issue more on the global arena.
But you see, if I'm to understand the position of the UN to the world, the position of African Union to Africa, if we are to appoint someone from, let's say, East Africa, let's say we decide that we are sending our president for the next 2 years to sit at the UN as a representative of Africa permanently at the UN table. There are those terms under UN for one to become a permanent member. It might bar the fact that Africa will want to change leaders, that you'll come for 2 years, I go, Mudali comes for 2 years, he goes, Samia comes for other 2 years, he goes. And the fact that these laws might bar us as Africans in rotating that seat around different countries, the same time you might realize that whatever South Africans need is not whatever people in Somalia need. Like, we have a clash of interests in Africa. Whatever Kenya needs is not the same thing that another country in Africa needs. Do you think the fact that we might be given this position and decide that, okay, fine, let's rotate it, the people from the West might not be in the same need with the people from the East, not the people from the Central?
As you rightly put it, people in different contexts experience life differently, and especially in Africa, where the gap between, say, the poor and the rich is actually vast. You would know the interest in Kenya and even the needs, as I said, the gap between the poor and the rich, even in different countries within Africa, is very vast. I'm looking at, say, Kenya and Burundi and South Africa and Nigeria and maybe Morocco. You see, same continent, but countries that are almost far apart. So looking at it in terms of personal needs for the citizens, the needs could be vast. But in terms of Africa, in terms of interest, Mudali, we do not produce. And therefore, our issues around imports and exports are universal. There are still wars and there are still issues around leadership and succession. Those will be the same issues around most countries in Africa. And therefore, I think putting aside the personal issues that people might have within countries, the issues in Africa on a global stage will be discussed by one person, I would say. The bigger issues, I would say. But the personal issues will be discussed maybe in forums, say economic forums like ECOWAS for the West, the East African Community and the COMESA and all those, and the SADC. But the SADC, I heard it was dismantled. But you see, now the regional issues in terms of business maybe and such can be discussed in those forums. And then having that permanent seat on the UN table can help us discuss now the global issues and even help us put a voice, for example, in an issue like the Iran, US and allies war that is going on.
We were speaking of us relying on the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, to run our economies. Is financial independence guaranteed with the fact that we have a president in the US who has decided if you don't align, we'll make you align?
Well, financial independence can be achieved, but not in the way that we think it would be.
Okay.
For example, I would say financial independence will be achieved by our change in the mindset and our change in perspective, and actually not the dependence on IMF or the World Bank or the Western countries to fund us. What do I mean, Mwavali? This is what it means simply that Africans have to realize that we have more than we think we have. And actually, what comes back to most of us, like, you see, there was a time, Mwavali, allow me to put this into context. There was a time there was a shortage of rice and we would import rice. And looking at Kenya as a country, for example, looking at Kenya as a country, you will see definitely that importing such products is a waste of time, or rather is something that can be produced locally, but we lack the goodwill. We lack the change of mindset that we can be producers. But Mavali, until we become consumers of our own products, that's what I meant. So producers and consumers of our own product, I will dare say that financial independence is far from it, because you produce, you produce, even if the production cost is high, you minimize on the cost of importation.
Yeah.
And therefore, financial independence, that is where it starts. And therefore, if we change our mindset, reduce the over-reliance on the West and the powers in the IMF and in the World Bank, then definitely financial independence will be achieved, but not in a way that we think it should be.
I remember I asked you of the fact that Africa is usually neutral. Things will just happen, and we are, like, for instance, let me take you to football. We had Senegal and Morocco play in the AFCON finals. Senegal won after a lot of chaos nearing the end of the game. The trophies are awarded. People have gone home. People have gone back to their normal football clubs. Like, we have already forgotten that we are preparing for 2027 to come to East Africa. Then, out of nowhere, a court says that the trophy should be handed back to Morocco instead of Senegal. And you can see some countries are just silent. Like, that's the problem of Senegal and Morocco. Do you think the fact that we are always just neutral on even things that happen within us, positions are in a place in the world whereby we can be mediators, maybe between the Iran and the US war?
Well, you bring a very interesting point on the African, quote unquote, lack of botheredness, if I can use, with issues with other people. And it puts us into a situation where then if something happens on the global arena, where do we stand? Can we be mediators, or just participants and victims of this war? And therefore, how will this come, Movali? It will come by Africa first being in a position where we can take care of ourselves. We are saying that much as there has been efforts, Movali, in the DR Congo, we haven't had the greatest goodwill to even stop the war. And maybe, just maybe, if we strengthen the frameworks within Africa, strengthen the African Union, and be confident about our own issues here in Africa, Mwavali, then I think we can become mediators. But it will depend then with the kind of leaders that we have. Because there is a trend in Africa where leaders are chosen out of personal interest or out of tribal lens, let's say. And therefore, it for change to come and for us to become mediators and even to get on the global stage and put our views in that war, it's a long way coming, but it is up to us to deal with our issues and have stringent frameworks even within ourselves. Be producers, because Mwavali, you know, in most instances they say that a man who has something has the audacity to speak, even in a forum, in a forum of people.
When you go back home and you have money,
exactly, people are bound to respect you, and it's therefore strengthening internal frameworks so that should we get to the global arena, then we can know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how do I say this? How do I say this without offending people? Okay. You sit down with Donald Trump. You sit down with Vladimir, and you have to tell them one thing, that whatever they are engaging themselves in is not totally good for the world. How different that for them?
You put me in a very interesting meeting with with such big leaders, and
just assume that
yeah.
you are the voice to the 1.4 billion plus Africans, and they send you, they tell you, Mudali, we rely on you to let these people know that this world is already a global village. Whatever is happening in Iran has an impact on my life in Kenya.
That forum will be an interesting forum, and I will tell them in no uncertain terms that the war within your countries does not just end within your borders, that it escalates to other regions, and these regions we feel them as a spillover effect, Mwavali. And you know, in war they say the ripple effect. We often use this word in war, but the ripple effect, I will tell them, the ripple effect of their war is actually vast, and it is being felt in ways that are unimaginable. Their war, their instability in their countries has surpassed the borders, and it has come even to the tables of the people in Africa through the hiked up economies, through the hiked up food prices. The people in Africa, or the people in other economies and in other regions outside those that are fighting Mavali, they have really felt the impact. So I will tell them in no uncertain terms that war is beyond their borders, and that this war, Mavali, has caused far more impacts, and that the resolution would bring more good than they think, and it would actually relieve more people than they think. And not that just the people in those countries, the people even outside.
Do you fear this war will escalate to something bigger?
Now, the sooner we handle the war, the better. As I rightly put it, this war started in the 1980s, and it was just a war between Iraq and Iran. And Iraq was trying to control the resources within Iran. You understand? And now it is the US with Iran. Now, allies are either Iranian or allies are US towards the US. And so you can see. And so the war escalating will depend with, one, how many countries join the war. And then number two, what methods do we use to resolve the war? Are we having amicable solutions? Importantly, what is the role of the leaders, Mwavali? What do they say? How do they speak? How do they speak it? Because this then determines how the people within the countries react, and even provoking the neighbors. For example, how as you rightly put it, maybe how the president of the US speaks, how the Iranian government speaks. So will we be more diplomatic? If we won't be more diplomatic, then I'm afraid, Mwavali, this could escalate.
Now, I have a sociology professor coming up. What is that one question you fear asking about the war, about Africa, about everything that is happening?
Well, sociology is an interesting topic actually, and it goes down to how we live and how we relate on from a social perspective. And I would, if I met this professor, I would ask them, have these global systems, for example, been made in a way that they will ever be fair? Will there be a point where we'll say that global systems are fair? And if not, then we should, does he propose that we should change our discussions around change in Africa? The systems in Africa, will they ever be fair systems? Because I think based on where you are, who you are, and how you perceive things, I think the systems have been inclined to be favoring a certain direction.
Well, I don't want to add anything on that question. Are global systems fair? that marks the end of our today's conversation. Like, this has just been a natural conversation flowing on its own. And I think this conversation is not going to end, because right now the war has escalated to another level from where it was last month. Let's see how it unfolds in April. Till we meet again, have yourselves a lovely, lovely day.